Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Linda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. We have a tremendous amount of content to cover in today's episode, so I'm going to make the preamble a little shorter than usual. I just want to announce that it is time for me to get back out on the road and visit colleges again. You know, our regular listeners know I did a 26-day trip to California in September and October, and then in November and December, I was out for 24 more days, hitting up North Carolina, mostly Virginia, and a little South Carolina in November and December. So now I'm going to Texas in mid-April. You know, fortunately, when I did my boarding school admissions travel season, which is mostly in the fall and a shorter stint in the spring after yield season, was my favorite part of the job. So I don't mind the travel. But more importantly, I need to get on these campuses in order to be the best podcast host for you, in order to be the best college counselor for the families I work with. So my plan is to visit the following 10 colleges: University of Texas, Austin, Texas A&M College Station, UTA, also known as University of Texas, Arlington, UTD, also known as University of Texas, Dallas. So those 4 schools in the UT system. And then 6 other private schools: SMU in Dallas, a.k.a. Southern Methodist University; TCU in Fort Worth, also known as Texas Christian University; Baylor University in Waco; Trinity University in San Antonio; Austin College in Sherman, Texas; and Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. Now, the first 8 schools I mentioned are ones that I would say we have high demand for, like in School Match for where I work, I'm going to say we have at least 3 applicants every year to all of those schools, and most of them more than 10. So I like to get out to the places where demand is the strongest. Now, Austin College and Southwestern University, those are just a couple underrated small gem schools. And I also like to get and visit some of those fly under the radar, really, really good schools that may not be on everybody's mind. But that's the plan. Now, if you live in any of those areas, and if you want to either host a small gathering of listeners, reach out to me at mark@schoolmatch4u.com. Now, we did 3 gatherings in San Diego, Santa Monica, and Redwood City on my California trip, and I get inspired anytime I meet our listeners. I'm actually still up in the clouds from that trip now, and that was September, more than 5 months ago. Friends, I'm in a great mood today, and to be totally honest, I'm surprised. I think it's partly because the weather's amazing here, but I'm surprised because March 1st, which will be 2 days ago if you're hearing this on Monday, our son Elijah would have been 30 years old, but he was stillborn, 38 and a half weeks into the pregnancy. I was so naive. Anitra said, "Oh, I don't feel the baby moving," and so, well, let's go in to check it out. I was not expecting. I can still see the look on the nurse's face when she had to tell us that the umbilical cord had got entangled around Elijah's throat and cut off his oxygen supply. But he has a tombstone in Dallas that I will definitely want to get by to see on my trip there. But I thought this weekend was going to be incredibly hard. But then Karis arrived from Durham late last night, and she'll be 29 in a month. So there would be no Karis if we didn't lose Elijah, because we never would have had kids like basically 13 months apart. So I'm in great spirits, and I'm counting my blessings. So even when you go through tough times, God can bring you through them, and you can come out stronger. Now, on today's episode, I'm going to share a tweak I've made to the 30 factors I use to consider when selecting a college. And then we're going to talk about 2 questions from listeners. And I'm flying solo, but it's going to be a lengthy episode. It's going to be very content rich and deep. I'm going to read it more than I normally do. So I hope I don't bore you. I hope I inform you, don't bore you. So Colleen from Virginia wants to know, when is the right time to start the college process? So we'll talk about that. Angie from California is looking for some guidance about college with the current administration making so many changes. She's just feeling at a loss and just looking for some guidance and direction. And we will close out with part 3 of 5 of my interview with Kathleen deLaski about her book, Who Needs College Anymore? So let's dive in. So friends, a few times back in the back half of 2024, I shared with you I have this new exercise for my families where you go through and you rank up to 30 factors, and you can stop it where things cease to be meaningful to you, but you're putting them in the order of most important to least important, and students do it and parents do it, and then you have a discussion about it, and it's really been one of the more useful things I've had students do. A couple callers on our 500th episode, a parent and a college counselor mentioned how helpful it had been to them. So right from the jump, though, there was one area that I knew I wasn't capturing. And I felt this area was important, but I was determined to not go past 30. It's in the academic realm, and I'll tell you what it is in a second. So I kind of said to myself, well, we do have an academic excellence category, so I guess it's okay letting that be a catch-all category. But it was still always just kind of like bothering me because I felt this area was too general just to say academic excellence, and I was missing something that was too important. So in case you haven't heard any of those episodes, I'm going to go on a breakneck pace and read the 30 to you again in alphabetical order, and then I will just share the one change that I've made and tell you why I made it. So these are the 30 in alphabetical order. Area surrounding the college, campus beauty, architecture, and campus feel, career outcomes, class size, club sports, extracurriculars that I like, college ranking, selectivities, prestige, and name recognition, college setting, large city, small city, suburban, college town, remote, rural, cost affordability, distance from home, diversity, experiential learning, co-ops, internships, study abroad, research, facilities, financial resource and financial wealth of the institution, food quality, fraternities and sororities, friendliness, graduation and retention rates, housing options, my type of kid attends the college, nature, green spaces, overall academic excellence. So that's kind of the category that I was bucketing this thing I'm going to talk to you about in a second. Political climate, religious affiliation and or religious culture, residential versus commuter students, safety, school size, small, medium, large, sports or school spirit, strength in my major, last 2, student support and learning support, and weather. All right, so what's missing? What I feel is missing, which can be important, is certain schools have very unique forms of pedagogy. If you're not familiar with that term, that's just a 50-cent word that refers to the art and science of teaching. So one example of this is the block plan that both Cornell College in Iowa, we've done College Spotlight on them. I've actually interviewed their VP of enrollment, and Colorado College have, where you take one course at a time. Another is Sarah Lawrence College, just outside of New York, where they allow students to design their own education by working closely with faculty members to create an individualized study plan. And their whole academic model is based on a combination of seminars and one-on-one conferences with faculty and independent studies. And so they believe that this helps foster a deep sense of ownership and depth in students. And I've had students go there who've absolutely loved it. And there's other creative forms of pedagogy out there. There's the flipped classroom or the inverted classroom, where Lynn University, for example, in Boca Raton, they use that in all of their undergraduate classes. They're probably the ones who made it most famous. So I always knew that these creative forms of pedagogy could be very important to certain students, and they were not really being captured in the list. But then I had an epiphany. I can change class size to the classroom experience, which is what I've done. And now I'm calling it the classroom experience, and then in parentheses says class size, unique forms of teaching, and professor access. So it includes class size, but it broadens it out. And I still get to keep my list at 30. So apologize for all these changes, but I'm literally sharing this as I think through this process and as I use it with students. I'm like literally like workshopping it right in front of you. The other 29 all stayed the same. All right, let's transition to our first question from a listener. Next voice you'll hear is Colleen.
Hi there. This is Colleen in Northern Virginia. I've been a listener for 3 years. Love all of your podcasts. Never miss one. Was incredibly helpful as we went through the college application process with our oldest child last year. And I'm just really grateful for all the advice and insight that you guys put out there. So thank you. My question today is about when it's appropriate or recommended to seek a private college coach, at what age or in what grade. We're starting this process with our second child, and our first son was in private school, and we got a lot of hand holding and attention from the college counselor there. Just, it was a smaller school. She had a smaller load of students. Our second child is in a great public high school, but it is larger, and we are looking to have some outside help this time. And I'm just wondering what age, what grade do you recommend families start that process? Is it closer to when families are actually touring colleges? Is it maybe earlier when students are beginning to select their high school courses? What do you feel like is the best path? Thank you.
So I love this question. So thank you, Colleen from Northern Virginia. Let me start by differentiating between starting the college process and getting answers to some questions about college early in the process. So I have 3 seniors this year. One's from Boston, one's from Princeton, New Jersey, and one is from Peoria, Illinois. They started very early. One started in 6th grade, one started in 8th grade, and one started between 8th and 9th. And I know what most of you are probably thinking. This is preposterous. Let a kid be a kid. But in reality, they never really started what I would regard as the official part of the college process. What they did instead was schedule a couple meetings a year to just understand how colleges made decisions, or to understand things like how important are sports or service or summer experiences, or when should test prep start, or is it worth it to spend so much time on sports if you probably aren't going to play in college? Or how can you know if you're good enough to play in college? These kinds of things. Or maybe they wanted to do some curricular planning. In one case, I met just with the parent from 6th grade all the way to 11th. The first time I ever met the student was in 11th. In one case, I met with the whole family sometimes, and sometimes I met just with the student. And in one other case, it was both the parents and the student. Now, none of these families regret learning the things that they learned about college early in the process when they did. But I don't regard them as starting the college process then. Let me see if I can give an example. A lot of times when I'm curious about a book, I'll go on to Amazon and I'll click the Audible and I'll just check out 5 minutes of the book. I might do that 2 to 3 years before I actually get around to reading the book. So I don't regard that as starting to read the book. When I start to read the 300-page book or listen to it, that's what I regard as starting the book. And that's kind of how I see it when students or parents meet once or twice or 3 times a year in middle school or in ninth grade, or like early in the process. I'm actually a big fan of families learning how decisions are made and getting answers to the big questions that they have early in the process. And I know we have a lot of podcast listeners who use this podcast and other sources for that exact purpose. It's a lot like putting your toe in the pool before you decide to dive in. Knowledge truly is power. Kip got it right. I used to work for Kip, and KIP is an acronym for the Knowledge is Power program. But let me answer the question, assuming that Colleen is referring to, like, once you start, you're going to have some type of continuous involvement in the process. And like a lot of things in college admissions, the answer for me is it depends. So let me start by saying something I shared before. When I moved from Westchester, Pennsylvania, I'd been working at the Westtown School from 01 to 09, to Atlanta in 2009, I actually moved there not to accept a position doing college counseling, originally I moved to accept a position as director of high school placement. They wanted someone who had connections at leading boarding schools throughout New England and California, really nationwide, who knew what it took to prepare kids to get into these schools. So I was working mostly with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And it was a couple years later that I accepted a position of director of college counseling, where I supervised 4 different schools. And do you know the same kids who were at the top of the class in 6th, 7th, and 8th were at the top of the class in 10th, 11th? The same ones who were in the middle of the class in 6th, 7th, and 8th were in the middle, and the same ones who were in the bottom of the class were at the bottom in 10th through 12th. So I say all that to say I'm absolutely convinced you can build a really good college list for a student after the first semester of 10th. And usually you're only going to have to do some minor tweaking. And there's a certain type of student who I feel is best positioned to start this process between January of 10th and July of the sophomore year. I'll get to that in a second. Once I have a transcript from a student after one semester in 10th, and I'm saying me, but it's true for any experienced college counselor, all of our co-hosts and many of our listeners, I'm going to have a very good sense of what their list should look like. And sometimes you have to tweak it, but very rarely do you have to tweak it because the academic trajectory of the students, both rigor and grades, changes considerably. Maybe a school might get moved from a possible to a probable, depending on performance, or from a possible to a reach or stretch, or from a stretch to an unlikely, possibly. And the times that I usually see that happen are extreme health conditions. So, for example, about 6 years ago, I was working with a student in Colorado, and I'll never forget this, but he got hit on a bicycle by a truck, and the truck ran over his chest. So he's in hospital for a really long time. This last year, I worked with a student from Illinois who was pretty much a straight A student. I think she'd had 1B in 9th and 10th, high tester, and then she missed 85 days in 11th because of a serious health condition. So when you have something like that, obviously the grades are going to plummet, but that doesn't happen that often. The other times when I see major changes in grades are emotional challenges like depression. Once again, doesn't happen that often, but sometimes it does. I saw a little more of this in COVID than I normally did before. And occasionally I'll have someone that has like an undiagnosed learning disability. Maybe they'll get to something like geometry and their mind just does not think spatially at all. But 97% of the time, the academic trajectory, grades and rigor are really similar by first semester of 10th as they will be at the end of 11th. And the times when you end up having to tweak a list is because, let's say you're starting out and a kid says something like, hey, I'm interested in math and I'm thinking about maybe, doing, pure math or applied math or, something like that. And then all of a sudden then later they say, oh, I think I want to do petroleum engineering. Well, if you didn't recommend any schools with petroleum engineering, then you gotta tweak the list, right? So sometimes that happens. Sometimes a kid will say, this is actually not that uncommon. They'll say, I think I want to stay within 4 to 6 hours of home. And then after a while, they're like, you know what? And it's not just the kid and the parents. We're a lot more open now to venturing further away. So that's fine. So you end up tweaking the process with them because this whole process is self-discovery and you're just getting to know yourself more as you go through this process. So who do I feel fits the description of the kid who should start between January and July of the 10th grade year? Very specific kid that's great to start in this time frame. So here are some of the things that I'll say are really good for this student. Does the student want to engage? Are they ready? Do they have an investment in their education? Do they have above average maturity? I'm not interested in trying to pull teeth as a dentist. So where's the student? And there are plenty of students that are like that. I mean, Anika's daughter, Janaea, she was into this stuff in 6th grade. She really was. I mean, that's unusual, but it's not unusual for kids to be there halfway through 10th. So kids are very inquisitive, lots of questions. The kind of kid who asks the parent, I would love to work with a college coach. Is that something you would get for me? Here's another one. Families that are looking at colleges outside of their local area. particularly if the family wants to visit colleges. So I'm thinking of 3 families I'm working with right now. One's from the Chicago North Shore area. One's from San Diego. Well, actually, the one from San Diego I've stopped working with. I was working with her, but she's a good example of this. She's a sophomore in college now. And one from Los Angeles. These are 3 people like that started. It just popped in my head that started at this time. But what made me think about these 3 families is they all took 3 major trips: hotel, airfare, rent-a-car, meals, like 4 to 7 day trips, because they wanted to see the schools in person. And many of them wanted to do it during the school year. They didn't want to do it during the summer. So starting at this time is ideal for the family that really feels like, I really want to try to get to the schools on my list. When I look on the internet, when I do all these other resources, it's just not quite the same as being there. And I just want to get there so I can figure out if I really want to apply to school. I need to see somebody said to me yesterday, I need to see the vibes. I need to see the vibes. Now, that isn't practical for most students, either because of time or money. But some people are fortunate and privileged to be able to do that. So it's really great for that person. Another person would be the person looking at very competitive colleges. It's really great for that person for lots of different reasons, to understand the landscape that's out there. Another person is the person that's really very open to applying early decision, which is oftentimes the same person as the person looking at competitive colleges. But the reason for this is, if you apply regular decision, right, you got National Candidate Reply Day, decision day, May 1st. If you're applying early decision, November 1 is the most common date, but you're really making that decision mid-September or early October, the latest usually. So you have to move your whole process 7 months up. And so if you're going to move your whole process 7 months up, you really going to want to get to the schools to see, am I comfortable for here for the next 4 years? So it can be good for people in that category. And scholarships, people that need a lot of scholarships, because there's a lot of work involved in that. Planning, getting your profile strong enough to compete for institutional scholarships, as well as people that are going to aggressively pursue outside external scholarships. I'm thinking of a student this year I worked with. She's one of the ones I referred to earlier when I told you those 3. And they have 2 full tuition scholarships. And I honestly don't believe they would have got that if they didn't put the early start in there. So, and this is going to sound contradictory, because I just said people who need scholarships. Now I'm going to go to the other side of the spectrum. People who are comfortable paying more. Because if you're starting earlier, it's going to be more expenses. Your college coach is going to charge you more if you're working with them for 24 months or whatever versus 6 months, almost always, right? And then you're going to be paying more for hotel, airfare, rent-a-car, meals, trips. So it does require a little bit of discretionary money. So I know it's kind of contradictory, people that need a lot of scholarships and the people that are comfortable financially. And then another big one would be athletic recruits, because the whole athletic recruiting process starts a lot earlier. There's a lot you need to do there, especially figuring out the level you can play, going to the right showcases and ID camps, and building relationships with coaches and all that's involved in that. That process starts earlier. So that's someone who I really would recommend would consider that January through July. And if you're looking at D1, high D1, I'd rather you be closer to January than July, to be honest. All right, let's take a look at who can start this process a little bit later. So instead of like January to July of the sophomore year, now we're talking August to January of the junior year. So anywhere between the end of summer, end of 10th, to, the end of first semester in 11th. So this can be great for someone who already has their test scores. They don't have to worry about that at all. That's one of the big time-consuming parts of this process. You've got that done. Someone who's already done a fair amount of travel to visit colleges. So they're coming in and they already have a sense of schools that they know because they've done a lot of visiting. Someone only looking at a few schools. Someone who doesn't plan on doing much visiting in advance. Like, not everybody has to visit in advance. Some people have the philosophy of, I'll do all my research, without doing on-site visits and see where I get in, and then I'll visit those schools. So someone who subscribes to that philosophy, you're fine starting later. Someone at an independent or private school where they start their process early and they're getting great counsel. So some people might say, well, why would those people want to work with somebody outside? Well, sometimes they like an outside perspective, and sometimes they like to be able to meet with somebody 7 days a week or 10 o'clock at night when their school's not going to do it. or some independent schools don't really work, over the summer the same number of hours. So there are reasons why sometimes people at independent schools still see value in working with a college coach. And I know that can be dicey and complicated. There's a lot of, let me not get off on that tangent. There's a lot I could say about that, how the right way to do it and the wrong way to do it. All right, so let's talk about now that later step, right? So now we're talking January of the junior year till May. So who can start here? Someone who's going to stay local within 90 minutes of home, because it's going to be really easy for you to visit those schools. You're not even going to really need any airfare at all, maybe not even any hotels. Someone not planning on visiting until decisions are made, same thing. Someone looking at less competitive schools. Someone who just isn't ready until now. Now, you don't need to have all of those things. Just if you have some of those things, you're a good candidate for that. And one thing I've noticed is when a family has a second kid, they almost always start earlier with the second student than they do for the first student. So, Colleen, once again, great question. I hope this was helpful for you. Don't forget to select your book from Princeton Review, and I'll share those choices again after we answer the next question from Angie. So let's transition to Angie's question.
Hi, Mark. Angie from California here. I'm hoping that you can share some words of comfort and advice for your listenership who feels like they are currently spinning in regards to what is coming out of Washington in our current political situation. Whether it's concerns about funding for college and what that will look like, which is hugely real for many of us, including our family, or whether it is not knowing how to navigate career field choices that had previously been made and now seeing jobs and entire career fields slashed, not to mention the funding for many of them. I know we're not the only family who feels some amount of paralysis in being able to move forward in the face of significant uncertainty and upheaval. I don't know if there have been past times in history where you've experienced similar types of feelings and how you've advised students in those situations before, but I know that your listeners, at least a significant portion of them, would love any words of calming or counsel or advice that you could speak into this particular situation. I know not all of your listenership is feeling the same spin and to a certain extent panic. And so I just want to acknowledge that some of your listeners may be really excited about what's going on. But I know that for many of us, this has flipped the table for our kids' college plans and trajectories, and many of us feel at a loss for what to do next. So I'll leave it at that, and I just thank you in advance for whatever you're able to speak into people's minds and hearts in this moment in time. And I just want to say we're grateful for you and your team. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
All right, Angie. All right, friends. You're going to have to stay all the way until the end for some good news because Angie's asking for some hope, basically, right? And the first part, you're going to be taking your medicine. You know when we get sick and you take that medicine and it tastes terrible, that cough medicine's just disgusting. But then when you feel better, it's all worth it. So that's kind of be how this conversation is. So, and I realized that Angie asked for more than just about money, but I'm going to focus mostly on money in this answer. And we'll touch on a few other things besides the financial aspect. But as we continue to talk issues in higher ed and things are changing so quickly, I know we'll come back and address other issues as well in other episodes. So there are multiple reasons colleges are struggling financially. And many of those reasons occurred before the new administration took over. And there are others that have been exacerbated within the last 6 weeks. So I want to talk first about factors prior to 2025 and then since January 2025. So before January 2025, let me just be very blunt about reason number one. American women are having less babies. I don't know how else to say it. You go back to 1990, the average American woman had 2.1 kids. How you get the fraction? Obviously, this is averages. There's no such thing as a 0.1 kid, but you get it, right? Since then, it's closer to 1.5. In fact, the drop of a half a child per family has happened just since 2007. And guess what? Number keeps going down. So that's a major factor. That means there's less potential kids out there for schools. So, these things are threatening colleges financially. Now, in 2015, 57% of students said they had quite a lot or a great deal of confidence in the value of college. 2023, that number's down to 36%, and lower than that in conservative circles, and much lower than that with boys. I was talking to a VP of enrollment this week, and she told me we have never seen a wider skew between the number of girls versus our number of boy applicants. And that part of it is people questioning the value of college. Now, what does this produce? Well, 4 million high school students graduate each year, but that's going to go down to 3.5 million by 2037, and that's according to WICHE. WICHE is just an acronym for the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. They're the most respected organization in the country at following this trends. For the 25 years I've been doing this, WICHE has been the gold standard. So when birth rates fall, when the country goes through tough financial times, like it did in 1990, financial duress and distress, it happened again in the dot-com bust, right around the turn of the century up till 2001, and again with the global financial crisis, 2007 to 2009, and then we're going to see it again during COVID. There's a very predictable pattern that occurs, and it goes something like this. The state pressure to direct money to urgent sources is almost inevitable. I'm talking about things like Medicaid and food stamps and pensions and unemployment insurance. So those expenditures go up. Meanwhile, sales tax and property tax and income tax and corporate taxes go down. So then what happens is colleges cut off what they consider non-essential services, or they reduce non-essential services. So I'm talking about reducing things like bus routes, and those potholes don't get fixed, and those DMV lines are longer. And unfortunately, budget allocations for college are seen as discretionary in light of other things that are seen as more urgent. Another example of something more urgent is funding K through 12 education, because I know not a lot of that money comes from the state. It's mostly local property taxes, but some of it is state funding. The thinking with higher ed is we can always pass the costs on to the parents, and there's always loans. Now, Nathan Graw is the other authoritative source. He's a Carleton professor, and if I was to name one person, I was talking to a bunch of experts, who's the foremost authority when it comes to demographic trends, it would be Nathan Graw. And Nathan Graw is forecasting a 10% enrollment decline per year from 2025 for the next 5 years. Right now, 39% of high school students plan to enroll in college. That number is down from 42% 15 years ago. But the percentage is lower of a lower number because of what's happening with births. And the birth thing almost always happens when there's tough financial times. People say we can't afford to have this many kids. So that's what you're seeing right now. 07, 09 was tough. Fast forward 18 years later, there's a birth decrease. And we already see the birth decrease during COVID. So this is going to come back again in 18 years. From 2008 to 2013, state appropriations fell by over $13 billion with a B dollars. 16 states cut their state appropriations by 20% or more. 6 states cut their appropriations by 30% or more. Arizona cut their state appropriations by 50% or more. And when colleges cut expenses, like departments either cutting them or reducing staff, laying faculty off, freezes, in tough times, when good times return, they never quite go back to the same level of investment in colleges. When I talk about appropriations, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how many dollars does your state give to the colleges in their state. This happened in 1990, 2001, 2009, and after COVID. Presidents don't get very popular cutting too many programs. So they like not to do that. They generally will find a way of passing the cost on to the paying student or parents. Now, just to prove the point, and this has literally been true if you went back and look at 1990, 2001, 2009, you see the same thing. But let's just focus on 2007 and 2009, great financial crisis. State appropriations are still down from those levels by 24% in Texas. They're down by 34% in Mississippi, and they're down by 54% in Arizona. Let's look at a school in a blue state, University of Washington. In 1989, they covered 80% of the cost of public schools. In 2021, they're covering 38%. Wisconsin only gets 14% of their money from the state. I said to someone the other day, they're talking about getting scholarships for Wisconsin. I'm like, good luck with that. Good luck getting merit money or out-of-state need-based money from Wisconsin. Ditto for Illinois. I remember when Andy Boris was there, he's now over UGA. He used to be very straightforward. Like, don't expect money from another state if you have a financial need applying to us, because we just don't have it other than federal money like Pell and FSEOG. UT Austin is only covering 11% of their costs by appropriations now. And when I was at CU Boulder in 2022, it was 4%. So many people have said these schools are public in name only. They're functioning effectively as private schools, requiring and relying on the wealth and affluence of their parent body to shoulder the load. So during times like this, colleges target out-of-state students and international students, and they treat them as cash cows. But the combination of this demographic time bomb and lower state funding and declining enrollment is about to explode. Then you have the appeal of alternatives other than four-year residential model, badges, certificates, online apprenticeships, entrepreneurship. One study of recent grads, 75% said that they can get a great education without going to college. Now, I'm not going to say more about this because Kathleen, deLaski and I are talking about this in my interview, which you'll hear next. Furthermore, people are sick of the rising cost of college. So all of these factors have threatened the financial health of colleges before 2025. Now, just in the last 6 weeks, there's several more. I'm going to read portions of articles to you to talk about these. So there's a new article by Prinz Magtulis, and it's called What Trump's Migration Crackdown Could Mean for Foreign Students. It just came out in January 29th, so it's a recent article. It says, after he won the election, many U.S. universities took the proactive step of warning their international students against staying abroad for the holidays and beyond. I remember when that came out, January 20th. Because Trump's first day of office, for fear that the students would have trouble returning to the U.S. under the new administration. Now, university administrators are worried about their funding. So a few days after Trump started his first term in 2027, thousands of students were stuck in their home countries. You may remember this, after he issued a travel ban against Muslim-dominated nations. Foreign students were also specifically targeted by lawmakers. Well, interestingly enough, the bark was a little bit bigger than the bite. So not as much happened back then. It started cracking down on international students coming over here as it looked like might happen. But once again, the tough talk has already started, asking immigration officials to tighten visa vetting procedures, which is likely to slow down times at embassies and consultancies. Immigration advocates are already expecting the increased bureaucratic tape, which was a hallmark of the first term. Now, those of us on the counseling side, we've seen a surge of interest in international colleges. So this could cut both ways. You got more Americans looking elsewhere, more international students looking to other countries, and more difficulty getting a student visa. And I don't know if we've ever said this on the podcast, but the foreign student population in the U.S. is the largest in the world. We have 1.1 million students, and this is 23-24 data, from other countries here. That's according to the State Department data. Most are coming from China and India, but there's lots of African countries on the rise. Canada and other countries are all like in the top 7 countries. Now, there's a real big debate here. Some say the bark's bigger than the bite. Trump had this tough talk in 2017, but he didn't actually curtail F visas. F visas are the main student visa. But others think this time is different. But this is the important thing, friends, for you to know. The threat of decreased international students is causing colleges to take serious financial precautions. College leaders are scrambling to determine how to navigate I don't know if I want to call it an edict, that came out on February 14th, issued by the Education Department Office of Civil Rights, declaring that all race-based educational programs and all policies are discriminatory and illegal. And when they sent this letter on Valentine's Day, department officials, they gave institutions 2 weeks. Comply with this or face investigations, including the loss of federal funding. That's why you're seeing all these offices all over the country closing all of their diversity programs. Now, loss of these programs is definitely going to hurt schools because it's going to lead to more dropouts and less retention. And it's going to be a disincentive for many students to come, because Julia did that diversity work at the college level. I did at the boarding school level. That work is very, very important. People rely on that. If you're not coming from a majority, and Vince did that work for years at many colleges, if you're not coming from majority culture, you need these programs to help people feel like a college can be a home away from home. Otherwise, it's just going to be too big of a cultural leap for most people to take. They're either going to not go, or they're going to go to an MSI or an HSI or an HBCU where they see people that look like them. So that's going to impact the budget, and it's going to impact retention and morale. Another thing, student loan borrowers can no longer apply for income-driven repayment plans after the Trump administration paused application. The Education Department's first substantial action on student loans under his new presidency. Now, this is more directed to kids not in college, but it's a deterrent knowing that there won't be support for handling loans, and that can also decrease enrollment. And in January, the Congressional Budget Office projected there would be a significant fiscal shortage in the Pell Grant program, like $2.7 billion by fiscal year 2026-2027. The CBO projects the program will be short $10 billion unless Congress puts more money toward grants. And I don't really see this Congress doing that. I haven't seen that yet. I haven't seen the interest in supporting under-resourced students. And right now, Pell covers financial aid for close to 40% of students. So that's another thing that's hurting colleges. Here's another thing. The U.S. aid has cut their research funding by like $350 million from USAID has been cut from university research. And the foreign aid agency has awarded this $350 million for grants to help find solutions to global crises. And researchers are warning the long-term impact could just shutter the agency. So I read an interesting article. It talked about this guy named Goldsmith, and he'd worked for 12 years in the soybean innovation lab at UIUC, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And every day since then, these lab scientists had worked to help the farmers and the business people solve problems related to soybeans, from how to speed them up, to threshing, to go through the arduous process, separating the bean from the pod, and how to address the lack of available soybean seeds and their varieties. So the SAL, which encompasses a network of 17 labs in 31 countries, mostly sub-Saharan Africa, but right now all that work is on hold. And Goldsmith is prepared to shut down the whole soybean innovation lab in April because of the massive cuts to federal foreign aid. A week into the current administration, Goldstein received a notice that the Soybean Innovation Lab, which is headquartered at UIUC, had to pause all operations, cease external communications, and minimize costs pending a government review. So Goldsmith had to tell his team of 30 people that all work on UIUC's campus in Champaign that he described as being like a big family to each other, that they were ordered to stop work. They could continue working on some internal projects, like refining software, but days later he learned the university could no longer access the lab's funds in Washington, and there was no way to pay employees anymore. And so after talking with university administrators, they set the date for the lab to close of April 15th, unless the freeze ended, and no review materialized. So on February 26th, the SLL basically served notice that its grants had been terminated. And he goes on to say other 16 labs will likely also close soon, though some of them are currently scrambling to try to find funding. Federal funding, check this out, made up 99% of Illinois' lab's funding, according to Goldsmith. In 2022, the lab received a $10 million grant that was supposed to last them through 2027. So it's not just UIUC. Several other colleges and universities are pausing admissions to grad programs. They're reducing their class sizes. They're rescinding offers. I read a quote to you last week from the University of Pennsylvania, expecting a $240 million shortage, literally rescinding acceptances. I was talking to another college counselor last week. They said this is going to be devastating for grad students because people are going into PhD programs wanting to go into these research positions. If the funding is cut, they're going to be like, why should I do this PhD program? Some of them were, taking out loans or really banking a lot on that research funding being there. And then it can threaten our country, which has been a leader in research. And it's one of the things that's given us so many prominent universities internationally is how strong we are in research. So the disruption to graduate school admissions is just the latest cost-cutting moves. And then we have NIH, the National Institute of Health. Okay. They provide reimbursement for costs for research for several colleges. So I'll read a few things to you here. In recent days, University of Pittsburgh and University of Penn and many other institutions have had to stop doctoral admissions temporarily, pausing admissions, especially in the biomedical sciences. And the pause has happened at private and public. Blue states and red states. University of Southern California had to do a pause. Vanderbilt's doing a temporary pause on graduate admissions. They had to slow their work they were doing on cancer research and Alzheimer research. In fact, that's hurting Americans in all 50 states. And then last week, some faculty began tracking these reductions, especially in biomedical reductions, and chronicling them and even sharing them on TikTok and talking about how people are going to have completely different career paths. So especially, PhD programs focused on the biomedical science, because they really rely on that long-term financial commitment, which is now more difficult if the NIH has stopped providing their grants. And colleges would receive billions of dollars in NIH support for this research. And those cuts, if they go forward, it's just going to be devastating to colleges. Here's a quote from someone from Rutgers. University research and scholarship operate on a time scale of years and decades, according to a Rutgers expert. He wrote this in a chapter in a letter to the New Jersey senators, Cory Booker and Andy Kim. Higher education would become impossible in face of capricious and arbitrary withholding of funding, elimination of entire areas of grant support for critical scientific research, and cancellation of long-term contracts. So the letter goes on to warn that the threat to funding is going to diminish the strength of the research power. The best scientists, the best scholars, and the best students will make the rational decision to take their talents elsewhere outside of the U.S. Once lost, this historic excellence of United States universities, including world-leading universities in New Jersey, public and private, will not easily be regained. Then we have something else going on in Florida, but it's starting to trend nationally. So does an undocumented student that has lived in a state their whole life qualify for in-state tuition? Well, Florida's ending that now, not allowing students to access federal aid if you're undocumented. This is something DeSantis signed very recently, immigration legislation. It prevents them from paying in-state tuition if they lived there their whole lives. And previously, undocumented students in Florida could apply for waivers to pay in-state tuition. And if they went to high school in the state for at least 3 consecutive years and enrolled in a college with 2 years of graduating. Now, under the new policy, it's a sweeping immigration bill. Only citizens of the United States or those lawfully present in the U.S. would qualify. Students receiving the waivers will be reevaluated July 1. Now, this is not only a Florida thing, because this is already spreading. And Florida is one of 25 states, by the way, that offered this in-state tuition to undocumented students at public colleges and universities. And now many other states are looking at doing the same thing. Here's a quote. Policymakers in other states are considering taking similar steps to curb in-state tuition for these students to embrace President Donald Trump's undocumented immigration policy. And this is in blue states and red states. This is not a blue-red state thing. Since the presidential election in November, state lawmakers in Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Texas have taken steps to remove in-state tuition. So it doesn't get much bluer than Massachusetts, and Minnesota is consistently a blue state. So this is not just a red state, blue state thing. And as the issue becomes a lightning rod, politicians in other states are doubling down on their financial supports for these efforts, including Indiana, New Mexico, Oregon, and Pennsylvania. All right. Now, in the past, when we've talked about financial distress colleges were under, The wealthiest, most well-resourced colleges were somewhat shielded and protected from that. Even when other colleges were seeing a demise in applicants, the most prestigious schools were not impacted. Not anymore, because the NIH funding impacts those schools so much. And the other thing is something called an endowment tax. Now, there hadn't been an endowment tax on colleges before the last Trump administration. And now they're talking about not only significantly increasing the endowment tax, but applying it to a much broader swath of colleges. So I want to briefly read an article. Listener sent it to me, actually. I really like this article. It was painful. It's called Cornell Announces University-Wide Hiring Pause, Citing Significant Financial Uncertainty. The university announced a hiring pause effective immediately across all colleges, schools, divisions, and administrative units in a statement on Thursday. A time of significant financial uncertainty along with all other higher education. The decision comes amidst Cornell and 11 other universities filing a lawsuit against National Institute of Health for funding restrictions that would cost $80 billion. And then some schools, it's even more cuts. You know, I was really curious because I know that Johns Hopkins gets the most funding. So I went and looked up an article, and they're expecting over $200 million in cuts in a year. So the potential for deep cuts in federal research, as well as tax legislation affecting endowment, has been added to existing concerns of rapid growth and cost escalations. And that's why there's a hiring freeze. So I mentioned this before, but there was a 1.4% tax that was imposed on a small group of colleges in Trump's first term. You had to have an endowment per student of $500,000 or more. So that's a pretty short list. It hit the Princetons and the Harvards. Now they're talking about levying that endowment tax on any school that has an endowment per student of $200,000 or more. So Cornell's sitting here, $395,108 endowment per student. They're now going to get hit with this tax. If that's not bad enough, they're not talking about it being 1.4% anymore. Some people are saying, let's levy 10% on them. And some are saying, let's levy 21%. I mean, this is multi-millions of dollars that will cost these wealthier institutions. One more quickly. Stanford University announces hiring freeze amid concerns about federal funding. Officials at these are all in the last 2 days. Officials at Stanford announced a freeze on staff hiring, citing concerns about the Trump administration's plans to cut funding for scientific research. University presidents say they're announcing a freeze effective 25-26. Here's a quote. Given the uncertainty, we need to take prudent steps to limit spending. And it goes on to say the cuts in the National Institute of Health are so steep, is going to significantly affect medical research, and not only at their school, but 21 other states. And it also mentions specifically the endowment tax as well. It says, along with cuts to federal funding, the leaders cite proposals in Congress to increase taxes on college endowments. And Rep. Troy Niels, sorry if I said your name wrong, from Texas, has a new proposal to whack the schools with a 21% tax. And it says this too would negatively impact Stanford's finances. It's a huge part of our budget. It's also going to be a disincentive for people to give if they feel like the money's just going to get taxed, taken away from the schools. So the leaders said endowment supports nearly 2/3 of undergraduate and graduate financial aid. So Angie, I know that this has been incredibly depressing so far, and you asked for some positive news. Well, I think there's some positives, potentially. I don't think a day goes by when I don't think of a quote from Abraham Lincoln uttered in 1858. He said, in this age, in this country, public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Against it, nothing can succeed. And then here's a key line. Whoever molds public sentiment goes deeper than he who enacts statutes or pronounces judicial decisions. Did you catch that? More powerful than lawmakers are public opinion, is basically what he's saying. Now, how's that relevant? Well, most of the time a new president gets a 100-day honeymoon, and that is not happening. Like, Trump is already generating a very, very significant backlash 5 weeks in. and his modus operandi is to double down. I think there's a really good chance he overplays his hand, and then the backlash is happening. Many of you may have seen like Republicans going to their congressmen and demanding that they don't let Elon Musk run amok with his 23-year-olds going through and looking at everybody's personal business and other things as well. Furthermore, the court backlash. There's already significant court backlash coming against so many of the things I've talked about. That could help. And, when the election first occurred, I was pretty depressed for a while because my perspective was, in fairness to Trump, he told you what he was going to do. So I saw what he said he was going to do. And my thinking was, well, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't ever get it back. But I'm starting to think that the backlash may be so fierce that people will see what they've lost and attempt to strengthen it and restore it. And I've also been encouraged by conversations with my brother. He keeps quoting this Andrew Jackson biography, which I haven't read, but he's just loving it. And he did say, look, Jackson was president from 1829 to 1837. He absolutely devastated the Native Americans. I mean, you may remember reading about the Trail of Tears, the ethnic cleansing that happened. It was 60,000 Native Americans from 5 major tribes, 1830 to 1850. He said they never recovered from what Jackson did. But if you look at most of the things that Jackson did, it generated such a backlash that institutions got strengthened. So my brother Norm has been encouraging me, just be patient. That backlash is coming. I don't know which way it's going to go. But in the past, I thought maybe there was, 90-10, the chances that we'd ever get the toothpaste back in the tube. And I think there is going to be a big problem with international relations overseas because, the first time we went there, it was like, okay, it's an aberration. But you go there again, there's a lot of things that are happening with alignments around the world that are really, really, really disturbing. But as far as some of these institutions, I think there's a good chance that when people don't have something, they will come to desire it so much more. And when there's an opportunity through the courts or through a backlash and, new people in charge, they will attempt to strengthen and protect what was taken away. I think there's a good chance of that, a much better chance than I ever thought before. Here's some more encouraging things. Now, this is only going to affect some people, but I'm going to put it out there. If you can pay in full, there's going to be more demand for you than ever. There's no doubt in my mind. Schools are going to dip down and take kids that are not as strong as they would have because they need money. Out-of-state students, I see them being more in demand. When you're in let's look at your own family. Let's say all of a sudden you find out you're going to have $20,000 more in expenses than you expected. You only have 2 choices. You'd have to increase your income or decrease your expenses or do both. Well, the main ways that colleges increase their income is by accepting more students. So it's inevitable to me that colleges are going to take more kids than they normally did because they're going to need the revenue to pay. That's going to seem to be less painful to them than laying off faculty and cutting departments. Of course, you have to be in a certain strength in the marketplace to be able to do that. But I do think it's going to make it easier to get in certain schools. Now, don't think a school that's accepting 10% of kids, I'm going to start accepting 35. It's not going to work like that. But watch, you're going to start to see articles coming out about how colleges increase their incoming class. So I know this is more negative than positive, but there still are some positives. The good news for me is, at first when the election occurred, I didn't know, had I misread America and did more than 50% of people, were they in favor of storming the Capitol and being full-blown MAGA? But that's not really why everybody voted there. There are lots of reasons, right? And there's a certain percentage of people just tired of inflation. And those same people are going to be very upset with $9 eggs and things not turning around. And so I'm more convinced than ever that the majority of the country is not in favor of a lot of the changes. And I really do believe there's an incredible power in public sentiment. It's just going to take a little bit of time and people speaking up and making their voice known. Colleen and Angie, really want to thank both of you for your questions. Now you're going to get your choice of one of 4 books from the Princeton Review. So you got the best 390 colleges. That was 2025. and that's by Robert Frenick, David Soto, Stephen Koch, and Aaron Riccio. College Admissions 101, 3rd edition by Robert Frenick. Essays That Kicked Apps, 55 Unforgettable College Application Essays That Got Students Accepted by the Princeton Review staff. Or book number 4, Princeton Review Digital SAT Prep 2025. And Penguin Random House is the publisher of all of these books. Now, in order to get your book, you just need to email me directly at mark@schoolmatch4u.com. Put Princeton Review giveaway in the subject heading, and I'll know right away that you've sent in a question or we've read one of your comments. If we read your comment on the air through Speakpipe, you also get a book. Just put that in the subject line. If you remember the episode it ran on, put that in the subject header or in the body of your email to let me know which question you asked. And remember to let me know in the body of your email which question you asked. In the body of your email, also put your name and full address with zip code. I'll get your request submitted to Princeton Review within 24 hours. Once again, thanks to the Princeton Review for their generosity. It's more important than ever to select a college that's financially stable. And I'm going to be addressing that next week so you can know how to do that. Let's transition to the conversation with Kathleen deLaski about her book.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 3 of 5 of my interview with Kathleen deLaski, Kathleen talks about the difference between micro-credentials and micro-pathways. Kathleen talks about the growth of certificates. Kathleen talks about the fields that are being disrupted the most by alternative pathways to college. Kathleen shares some great opportunities for students without degrees. Kathleen talks about apprenticeship degree programs. Listen and enjoy. And you talk about that in your book. You talk about how community colleges for years, have produced leaders and they formalized micro pathways. Is that what you're talking about here when you talk about micro pathways?
Oh, yeah. Well, so micro credentials is just kind of a catch-all term that people are using when you're getting a certification or a certificate in any skill or piece of expertise. For instance, the micro credential that this professor I mentioned is using in his class is called AI and the Future of Work. And he said it's helping people get hired to be kind of the navigator in their department to help people figure out AI, but they're not getting an entire degree in machine learning. And he said one reason they're not doing that is because the AI field is changing so quickly that a degree would be meaningless. He said he teaches courses in it and he has to change them every semester because it's changing so dramatically. So that's one form, is just micro credentials of any sort, which can be offered at the high school level. They can be offered by employers. You can get them from, a nonprofit. It's sort of a catch-all term for a short form of learning that might just be, a couple of modules. It might be a 6-month process. And they're not very expensive usually to earn, and you usually earn them online. And then you're sort of tested along the way, or you have to take a test. A micro pathway, which is a fascinating development at community colleges, is the idea that the college will work with a group of employers when they have a high demand need in their region, and they'll create a new job role. Like, one that's working in Arizona is around like fiber optics specialist, or semiconductor machinist, or cloud computing engineer. Right? These sound like jobs that might require a degree, but guess what? There are plenty of jobs, what they call middle skill jobs, that don't need a degree. And you can take a short pathway, meaning a couple of micro credentials. So you earn a couple of these skill set chunks of learning, and then you can get hired because the employers have said this is the bar. Right, this is what we want you to have. We don't need the degree because that would take 2 to 4 years, and we need the workers now. So that's the difference between a micro credential and a micro pathway.
That's helpful. Have you seen the growth of colleges offering more certificates?
Oh, yes. In fact, certificates, I think it was something like in the past 2 years have grown, the enrollment nationwide has grown like 19%. And it's the fastest growing form of college enrollment. The other really fast form of college enrollment that's growing is high school students taking college classes, what's known as dual enrollment. And that's actually taking the country by storm. It's really interesting that so many high school kids are saying either, well, let me get a jump on the price of college, let me, because it's usually free to the student in most locales. And they can actually earn a whole chunk of an associate's degree while they're still in high school. And others are using it to get industry certifications, which is also really interesting.
Now, what are the professions that you feel are no longer going to need a college degree that maybe currently do? Like, where do you see things changing the most? Or another way of putting it would be like, what would be some fields if you found out a student was going to college for X degree, you might talk to them and say, do you know how much things are changing? That may not be necessary.
Yeah, well, I would never try to talk someone out of college unless they were thinking about leaving anyway, and they're like, I can't afford this, and I'm thinking about, doing it a different way. But I wouldn't.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah, I wouldn't like try to get them to quit. So I would say the fields where there's the most movement include healthcare, tech, business, advanced manufacturing, and to a certain extent, education. In healthcare, for example, jobs that used to have degree on them now often don't, or in some places they did and didn't, but where shortages of workers, and let me say, shortages of workers is often what drives the removing of a degree requirement. But jobs like medical technician and dental hygienist, I mean, some of these, have required like a 2-year degree in the past. They're on the nursing chain. There's different levels of nursing, some of which still require a degree. Don't get me wrong, but they're managing to create job roles because of shortages where you don't need a degree, and maybe you just need to be supervised by somebody who does have the nursing degree. But so there are jobs on that chain. And then what we're also seeing in like nursing and teaching, which are so, where there's such shortages, people still have to get the piece of paper, but they're being allowed to do it from other more junior roles in the building, while they're working. And so it's not like, okay, you've got to leave your job and go to college and then come back. Like I interview a teacher in the book who was a single mom, 50 years old. Like, I'd always wanted to be a teacher, but, couldn't take the time off from work to go to school. And she was working as a paraprofessional in a school, as a teacher's aide. And so now there are these amazing programs where you can, kind of do both. You become a teacher, you're substituting and you're getting your degree, but you don't have to leave your job. You're getting paid. School's getting paid for you. And so, these are great. These are called apprenticeship degree programs, which are becoming popular in teaching and are also starting up in nursing. Other fields would be a lot of areas of tech. You can be a network administrator, for example, with these certifications I mentioned. You can be a cloud engineer. You can be a project manager. I mean, a project management doesn't require a degree, but there are certifications that are, looked on as important signals. In business, my own daughter was able to get into digital marketing by just doing a boot camp. She didn't go to college. This is my other child. And that she was able to, parlay that, and she's, kind of doing her own consulting now for digital marketing. Although I will say, marketing is one of the fields that, as well as research, we're quite worried about. Those are, AI is making it such that, you may not need to hire as many people in some of these fields, some of these white collar job fields. So that's what I'm worried about. Advanced manufacturing, like you can be a fabricator, a machinist, a mechatronics engineering technician, and these are all like hot industry fields, jobs that don't necessarily require a degree, and you can be a power plant operator, and I believe that even certainly like software engineer, you don't have to have a degree now, and what you're seeing happening is they're pushing like things that are higher up the, let's say the food chain in terms of like job promotions are being pressured to remove the degree requirement unless like there's like a safety or litigation concern about the role. Like obviously if you're an auditor or an accountant, those those are going to be holdouts, but you're seeing a lot of removal of degree requirements as the jobs become more when there are shortages for the jobs in particular.
Kathleen, in your book, you talk about the new majority learners. Who are these new majority learners?
Well, I actually dedicate the book to new majority learners because I see them as both the beneficiaries of college, but also the many of the folks for whom college was never designed, and therefore they're bumping up against the barriers that are spitting them out of the gauntlet, or they're not even trying because they've gotten the message that they're not, quote, college material. So a new majority learner is defined in my thinking as someone who might be income constrained, so they have to maybe work, they have to go into debt to do college. They might have family members that they're caring for, so they have they have a lot of other life commitments that get in the way, and these folks in a traditional college setting struggle and often are made to feel otherized. So single parents, single moms, a large percentage of undergraduate women in college are single moms these days. Veterans, older folks who might be trying to make the traditional model work, neurodivergent students. These are just some of the examples of categories of learners for whom college was not originally designed, and therefore we need to expand and broaden and redefine college to make it work for them.
So Kathleen, we were having Kathleen and I were having an interesting conversation off air that I thought you listeners might be interested in. About my background at KIPP, and for 8 years I recruited KIPP schools. Turns out I was recruiting a KIPP school in DC that Kathleen was actively involved in working with. And then for 14 years, in Atlanta in a director role, and I saw the complete evolution of KIPP. I saw KIPP go from, first it was KIPP 2 college, then 2 and through. And then we started to get a bit of a backlash. And the backlash really started, I would say it started just before the pandemic, around 18-19, where I'll never forget one of our highest achievers, Jordan, said, I don't feel like I have to go to college. Like, I think I should be able to pursue other things. And at the time, there was so much fear that if you didn't get kids on that path, they would get distracted and end up in something that would not be productive. So there was a lot of pressure brought on her. I was an advocate for a long time, that you can't sort of, what's that saying? I always get it wrong. Square peg, round hole, or something. No, there were kids there that were not academically engaged, and to say you needed to go to a 4-year residential place, and then they would put some pressure on us to try to steer kids to schools with the highest graduation rate. It was very well intentioned, and KIPP has done a lot of great things, but it was also hurtful because there were a lot of kids that went off that weren't college ready. And I used to speak up and say, are you going to pay their loans back when they drop out?
Wow.
So I'm happy to see the last few years, it was a complete swing toward alternative pathways. And that college isn't for everybody. And there was a complete swing in that direction. So I experienced it in my world. So I know there's a big tsunami out there that you're addressing. And what are your thoughts? And why don't you share your own charter school and background with our listeners?
Yeah, well, I started working with the charter school movement around 2003, 2004, and for like the next 9 or 10 years. And that was really the heyday, or the sort of culmination of the heyday of the College for All movement and the no excuses charter schools, like Kip was the leading example of. And I was working around the country in different cities, trying to, I worked with a foundation, the Walton Family Foundation. We were funding, the startup of charter schools all over the place. And this idea that, wow, if you could just improve the academic preparation, you would have so many more kids be college ready. And, but the country did move the needle on the entrance to college, on application and enrollment in college. For low-income students, for students of color, you can really see the needle move in the 2000 aughts. But then what we started to realize when the data was coming in, that so many of them, as the story you just told, were actually not completing college and were dropping out, some with debt. And a lot of the college advisors were sort of like, okay, wait, were we pushing these kids to do this? And what else would we have them do if they're not going to do this? Then this is the issue that is kind of central to my book, which is that we haven't elevated other pathways. We've got this one aspirational path to the American dream, a 4-year degree. And, what about the people for whom that's not a good fit? And we were trying to fit everyone into that, that round hole, as you say, or the square hole, or whichever it is.
Yeah.
And, far be it for me to say, oh, well, this person or that person shouldn't go to college. And I think that's, that was exactly the fear, right? That that advisors, like you, or, policy influencers like me, would be accused of tracking, right? And that's why we're pushing everyone to college. But, if we had other pathways to the American dream, then it wouldn't be such an issue. And Kip's a great case in point, because they, as you say, right before the pandemic, they went to this approach to say, okay, we're going to support multiple pathways. But after the pandemic, in the last year or so, maybe you haven't been as involved and you're not familiar, but they have gone back to a college for all. They're kind of tweaking it to call it, what do they call it? Something like that everyone's college option ready. In other words, that everyone could be in college if they choose. And the reason they've tried to go back to basics, right? Because the test scores have fallen everywhere, and the absenteeism and all these issues that kind of came out of the pandemic and were actually starting to happen before, have kind of led them to a place where they feel like we have to focus on making students college ready. And so Kip actually has swung back, yet again, to saying we're college focused. But a lot of other charter schools around the country, I will say, are and regular schools are trying to work hard to create the optionality of other pathways, like what are the other kinds of schooling, apprenticeships, go to a community college to work on certifications. These are some of the options that people are looking at.
Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with Kathleen. Hope you join us next week for the next segment. On Thursday's episode, Hillary joins me to answer a question from an anonymous listener who wants to know, what is our advice when it comes to skipping optional questions? And we kind of start out on that topic, and then Hillary and I bounce all over the place and talk about everything under the sun in a pretty lengthy segment. Then we'll have part 3 of 4, interview with Jonathan Hughes and Julia Shields-Rutna from MIFA, where I ask every question I can think of to help us better understand 529 plans. And then Lisa and Linda will be back to answer a great question from a listener who wants to know, there's so many things to do after you submit the application. What am I missing? What do I need to do after my student submits their applications? Friends, have you ever gone to a really expensive, highly rated restaurant only to be disappointed in the food quality? Well, there's a good chance that nothing was actually wrong with the food at the restaurant. The problem just may be that the food just wasn't a good match for your palate, for your taste buds. And sometimes college is like that expensive restaurant. It's great for others, but it doesn't jive with your taste buds. So never forget, There's no such thing as the best college. There's only the best college match, because college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.